Okay, hello everyone. My name is Eric Mazowski, and in this tutorial we're going to be continuing the 101 series by taking a look at all the different things that make up a polygon object. We'll also be taking a look at the EditPoly modifier and how we can alter the shape or the detail of an object with it. And then at the very end we'll just do a really quick exercise of taking a box and converting it into a staircase. So, for right now, let's just make sure that Max is open and you have a very simple box in the middle of your scene. Now, when working with polygon objects, there's a couple things that we want to do. First, if we move over to the Modify panel and apply an EditPoly modifier, you'll see that this gives us several options underneath selection. If we click on our drop-down list, we see the same number over here. These are just the words for these icons. So if you feel more comfortable saying, say, going to a vertex, edge, border, and so on, as opposed to these icons, you know where you can get to them. Okay, so what are all these things? So first let's go to Vertex. Now, Vertex is a single point in space. Now, you may notice that our box has this white border around it. This has been true of all the objects that we've been selecting. But for our purposes here, we're going to hide that so we can clearly see what's going on. So if you press J on your keyboard, they'll hide that selection bracket. Okay. So you can see with Vertex, we have these little dots at each of the corners. Okay, each one of these are vertices and they can be moved. Now all your selection tools can apply at this level, at this sub-object level. So you can hold down Control, click on multiples, move them around, and so on. Next from there is Edge. Now if we move the cursor, you can see that it changes, and we click, but we can't really see the edge. The reason for this is we're not telling the viewport to draw our edges. So to tell it to do so, you can press F4 on the keyboard to toggle them on and off, or you can right click on the name of your viewport and go down to Edged Faces. That will have the exact same effect. So we want to make sure they're on. And so now we can click on each of these, and these become our active selection, which we can then move, rotate, or scale. Okay, next to that is something called border, and we'll go over that a little bit later. But basically what a border is say I didn't have a face here, and it was just a big empty hole, but I had these edges along the side of it. What a border would be, it would select all of these that surround the opening. Okay, fourth down the list is polygon, and a polygon is basically everything that lies within these edges. Now right now, they're simply squares. So we can select any of these, move them just like before. And then finally we have element. Now element is when, say you have two objects and then you attach them together. An element allows you to select each of those objects independently, even though you've already attached. Okay, so let's get into some of the tools that are available to us through these various options. Now a lot of the options that we're going to be going over underneath Edit Vertices can also be accessed through the right-click menu. If you notice in the right-click menu, while in Vertex mode, you'll see that we have many of the same things that we have down here under Edit Vertices. So once you get more proficient with these tools, you can easily just right-click and go to whatever you want. Okay, so let's get started. Let's just select the vertex, and we're going to start off with Extrude. Now, you may notice that some of these have these little boxes next to them. This means that you can access the settings for the button to the left of it. Now, if I just click on the Extrude button, and I move the cursor over my vertex, you can see the cursor changes. Now, with this button activated, it's a click and drag operation. Okay? However, if I click on the little button next to it, it's a numerical type in. And so you can see what happens here. So for this one, I gave it a negative value. I can also adjust kind of like the width or the thickness of the spike in this case. And then this one I gave a positive value. So I'm a big fan of using the box almost all the time, unless I want to repeat the same technique over and over again, in which case I'll just use the right click option. Now, one thing to keep in mind when using this settings dialog box is if you click on the apply option, it applies whatever change you want, but then it takes that same vertex and uses it as a selection for the next part. So if you keep on hitting apply, you can see how it just keeps on extending it and getting thinner and thinner and thinner. However, if we only select one of these, go to Extrude, click OK, notice how it keeps our vertex selected, but it doesn't do anything else. So keep that in mind when working with the settings dialog box. Okay, so now if we rotate around, let's go to Chamfer. Chamfer just makes a nice planar cut. Or again, you can use the little settings box, so you can specify how big it is, and then you can click on the open box to create a hole. We're going to keep it closed for now. Alright, after this we have Weld. And what Weld does is it'll take multiple vertices, and if they're within a certain distance from each other, it'll collapse it into one. So, for example, if we click on the little settings dialog box, down here it says before 28, after 28. This is the number of vertices that we have on our object. So, if we click and drag over this ring here, or this set of vertices, and we keep bumping our threshold up, I think I may have made this very large, made this object huge. Okay, let's start typing in values. Okay, so why isn't that working? The reason is that we have another vertex at the end of the chain here. See, if we go and we select, say, 2 on this side, it automatically collapses it. And if we look down, our before is 28 and our after is 27. Oops. So what we'd have to do here is we'd have to first get rid of this vertex at the end and then weld those together. So to get rid of a vertex, what we can do is we can select one. And there are two ways of getting rid of it. You can either hit delete on the keyboard and it creates a hole, or you can hit backspace on the keyboard and it'll try to patch up the surface so it won't leave any open areas. So in this case, we'll select the stop one, hit the backspace. There we go. We still have a nice little surface at the end. We can now select those, go back to our weld tool, and it'll bring it into a point. Okay, now target weld, which is directly below it, is a click and drag operation. So you click and drag one vertex to the next. So again, we want, say, this vertex to be welded into this one. So we click and drag from that vertex onto the next, and it welds those two together. And then the final one that we're going to be going over right now is connect. Connect is a very useful tool for adding more detail to your objects. So you may have noticed that when we're moving objects, we can really only define our object wherever there's edges. Okay, you can see that we can't really define the top too much because there aren't any edges going across it. So say we want an edge going from this vertex to this vertex. We can select both of these, click on the connect button, and it'll automatically create an edge between those two. So there we go. Okay, so now let's move on to the edge options. Okay, edges are very similar to vertices in terms of functions. You know, we basically have the extrude, which operates in the same way, kind of creates a little bit of a spike effect. And we have chamfer, which does its thing. Weld, the same thing, and so on. Now, one thing that was added to 3D Studio Max version 8 is the bridge tool. And what we can do is you can take multiple faces and kind of like stitch them together if they create a hole. So let's just say we have, hit delete, take that, go, we add a segment. You can add multiple segments. You can tell it whether to smooth or not. And you can reverse the triangulation if you end up getting a lot of errors or anything. But it's a quick way to add some additional geometry to your scene. Now, in addition to this, a couple really neat options are we have the connect tool again. So we can select two edges. So say that one and that one. Hit the little box next to connect. Now here we have more options than we did with vertices. We can specify the number of connects to make. We can specify how they're spaced, so whether they're really tight together or far apart. And we can also specify where they connect along those two edges. So you can get a lot more control over where your objects are connecting. Okay. So this is basically what we're going to go over for the edges. Now if we move over to polygons and take a look at these, again, very similar to edges. So we can select one, and we have the extrude option. You can bring it out or bring it back in. We can do an outline, which will just kind of resize it. And we have a bevel, which is like an extrude, and then an outline. We can do an inset, which will kind of like create a face within a face. We can do a bridge, so if we have two faces across from each other, we can create additional polygons next to that. And so you can just keep on layering these effects. So like hinge from edge, pick hinge, so we pick the edge that we want, and then when we click on it or set the angle, it creates additional faces off of that part. And you can specify the number of segments, and it creates a nice curve from it too. It's a nice fan shape. We can also do some more advanced stuff like extrude along a spline, and we'll be going over those later. If you have a very low polygon object and you know how you want your individual triangles or your edges to flow, you can go to Edit Triangulation and then just click and drag, or just click on the various vertices that you want your edges to attach to. Okay, so having gone through this, let's go and create a very quick staircase out of a box. Okay, so we'll delete our current object, create a box in our scene. We'll just be doing this relatively so we don't have to worry about scale right now. But technically, if you're going to be making this for use, you should pay very close attention to scale. Okay, so we have a box. Now we can apply an EditPoly modifier again to it, or we can right-click and go down to Convert to Editable Poly. Now that completely gets rid of our box base object, so we won't be able to get back to those parameters, but that's okay. We're not too concerned with that. So if we click on Edge, select this one, going across. Now we also have a couple tools for selecting objects. You'll see right underneath where we choose what we want to select, we have Ring and Loop. Ring will try to select all of the edges that are parallel to the one that you currently have selected. So if I click on that, you'll notice that selects all of them that are parallel. Another neat feature, which was just added in Max 8, is the ability to step. So I can cycle around the various edges. I can hold down Control while I click on these to grow my selection, or I can hold down Alt to remove from my selection. So in our case, what we want to do is we want to click on Ring, just the button, because we want all of those edges. We're now going down underneath, Edit Edges, and then click on the little settings box next to Connect. I'm going to choose 2 segments, increase the pinch quite a bit. These will be our kind of like our side railings or our concrete blocks that we'll be seeing on the side of the steps to frame it nicely. And we want to keep the slide the same, so we click OK. Now we select this one in the middle again. Now if we just take this one right now and move it up or down, you can see what happens. It creates a ramp on the sides, where what we want is we want this to stay perpendicular or parallel to the ground, so completely flat. So what we need to do here is we need to work our way back to the top, click on Ring again, go back down to Connect, and adjust the pinch so that our 2 edges are very close to the previous ones. Not necessarily right on top, but just in front of it. Click OK. We can now select the center edge and then drag it down a bit to give ourselves a nice ramp. Okay. Now we're going to start adding some steps. So if we click on one of these side edges, and this one as well, again, click on Ring, go back down to Connect, reduce our pinch to 0, and then just give it a value of, let's say, 6. This is how many steps we want. Click OK. Okay, now we want to add some depth to these steps. Now, you may have asked why I decided to make the edges go all the way around. The reason I do this is to keep the object, or to keep the polygons clean. Okay, and you rarely want to have more than a quad, meaning you rarely want to have a 5-sided polygon. So by doing it this way, we can keep everything nice, clean, and uniform, and then if we have to optimize, we can do that later. Okay, so let's just select these going down. Oops, sorry, these on the side. Skip the top. Okay, go to Connect again. Reduce our segments to 1. And adjust the slide so that it's just before the step above it. We're now going to jump into our side view, and we're going to right click in the left view so we don't lose our selection. Okay, we want to make sure that we still have all those little edges selected. So in the left view, what we want to do is we just want to drag it down until it creates a straight line, and drag it back. You can now select this top one in the middle to drag that down to create a nice flat step too. Okay, and so there's the beginning of our staircase. Now, remember, we don't usually want to have a lot of five-sided polygons. So what we have here is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So to avoid this, what we can do is we can build edges here in a couple different ways. We can use vertices, so we can select our vertices, right click, go to connect, and that creates our edge. Remember, this is also also available underneath Editable or Edit Vertices on the right hand side. But we can also use a neat little tool called Cut, which is underneath Edit Geometry. So if we click on Cut and we move the cursor over the object, you'll see that the cursor changes into 3 distinct forms. The first, this small box, is when you're over a vertex. When you get this elongated center line, you're over an edge, and when you get the large box, you're right in the middle of a face, or in a face. So what we can do is we can just left click once, make sure we're over a vertex, left click again, all the way up. You can now rotate to the other side. Pay very special attention to what cursor you're seeing, because a very common mistake when using this is to click too quickly and then accidentally create a vertex where you don't want it. You would then have to handle this by doing something like a target weld, by clicking and dragging it up to the one that you intended. Okay, so there's our staircase. Now you may be wondering why it looks kind of funny in regards to the lighting. And we can fix this really quick just by applying a smooth modifier to it. Right there. And just turn on auto smooth. So there we get our nice hard edges. And there is our staircase. So hopefully this got you familiar with EditPoly. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or post on the forums. Thanks.